led by Mr. Chambers.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. I will now ask Mr. Kumar if he will do the roll call.
Okay. Tom Ashland, Dr. McGraw. Ms. Abbott. And Mr. Chambers. Here. Charleston County, Chesterfield County, Mr. Winslow.
Here, present.
Mr. Carroll.
I'm here.
Ms. Carroll.
She's been replaced by Mr. Miller.
I'm standing in her place.
Okay.
I'm Mark Miller.
Mark Miller.
And we did transmit a letter.
Yes, I
with
apologize
that.
for that. We must be using a wrong list, so.
Oh, that's she was saying. Okay, I'll update that. Ms. Fry.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Waters.
Nope.
Hanover County,
I don't think you called me from Chesterfield.
Chesterfield.
Jim Engel.
Mr. Engel, my apologies.
You just got you all messed up today.
Hanover County, Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Peterson. Ms. Pritchard. Mr. Whitaker.
Mr. Waddell.
Mr. Waddell. Henrico County, Mr. Nelson.
He's here, Sid, but not in the room.
Mr. Bannon.
Here.
Ms. Thornton.
Here.
And Mr. Baca.
Yes, sir.
And
I missed it.
okay.
Here.
Okay, got it. Newcomb County, Ms. Page. She hasn't come on yet, so I'll wait. Mr. Lockwood. And Ms. Pearson.
Here.
Housing County, Mr. Byerly. And Mr. Hall.
Here.
And the City of Richmond, Dr. Newville.
Here.
Mr. Addison.
He's here.
Ms. Lambert. Ms. Lynch. Ms. Robertson. Mr. Poole. And Mr. Giovanni.
Here.
That should be concluded for the roll call.
All right, very well. Thank you, Mr. Kumar. We do have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is public comments. This meeting is being held in person and also via Zoom link. Individuals may register but are not required to register. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the commission? If so, please state your name or the entity that you represent. Anybody from the public? For the record, doesn't appear that anyone's here in person. Is there anyone via web? Seeing none, we will close the public comment time. The next item on the agenda is a consent agenda. Are there any amendments by any committee members? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
We have a motion by Dr. Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Thornton. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Can I make a comment here real quick?
Let me get this vote real quick. Any opposed? Hearing none, comment time.
The only thing on the consent agenda was the approval of the minutes, but it's been pretty well documented that occasionally somebody needs to remove the minutes from a consent agenda, and I would recommend that minutes are held out separately, and then consent agendas could be the actual things that people could have read before they come in the room that are easy to vote on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and we're actually gonna vote on the minutes separately, but from an administrative standpoint, it is listed on the consent agenda. So for the record, I'm actually gonna go back and redo that. I'm gonna remove the minutes because I have that as item B, and I like those removed as well from the consent agenda. So I'm gonna ask that we rescind that vote, hearing no opposition. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna amend the consent agenda to remove the minutes, and we'll vote on all items other than the minutes. We'll vote on those separately because there may be some discussion. Dr. Newbill, would you care to second the approval of the amended consent agenda?
Absolutely.
Very well, we have a motion by the chair, seconded by Dr. Newbill. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the December 8, 2022 minutes for the full commission. Have all commission members had an opportunity to read the minutes? Are there any additions, deletions? Any discussion? Yes, sir, Mr.
Chairman,
Waddell.
I was being held hostage on a Caribbean island in December. Cruise line called it a shore excursion, so I'm gonna have to abstain.
Sure, certainly. All right.
I was in Hawaii, so I have to
We'll
abstain
note
too.
that.
Well, that's the reason for removing it, because you already didn't do
Very well. Are there any corrections to the minutes?
abstention.
I do abstain as well, I was absent.
We'll get that, we'll pull that when we get to the vote. Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved,
Yeah.
I was not held hostage. I'm envious of,
Motion by Dr. Newbill, is there a second?
I was seconded, I was here.
Is there a second? I've actually got another second from the city of Richmond, so thank you for that.
Was that Mr. Addison?
Mr. Addison? All right. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have one by Mr. Waddell. Please state your name and your abstention.
Mr. Giovia for illness.
Ms. Fry, out of town.
Just not present, sure.
Amy Pearson, out of town.
Mr. Chambers, out of town.
Anyone further? Very well. Mr. Kumar, do you have those recorded? Publish the vote, they're passed with the ayes recorded, no nays recorded, and the abstentions recorded. Very well. The next item on the agenda is a standing committee, standing committees and any other business. So the executive committee, we did not have a quorum today. We took no action. We did receive an update on the health insurance that the full committee had asked the executive committee to look at, and I'm not gonna ask for a vote, but unless there's any opposition, I think it's been asked that the executive committee continue to review that from the cost standpoint and the coverage standpoint. We think we have some really good options that are available to us now, us being the entire PlanRVA, and we're gonna continue to look at that. Dr. Newbill, myself, Reverend Nelson, and Ms. Page received a presentation today, and Ms. Schickel put that together. So we're gonna be bringing that. We are in the season, as Ms. Schickel mentioned earlier, for folks to be looking at health coverage, and that's something that we do need to continue to look at, whether it's cost, whether it's coverage options, retention, recruitment, all of those things play a part in the benefit packages. So we're gonna continue to look at the best coverage and competitive opportunities that we have to provide for the employee base here, and we'll bring something back to the full commission. I want to make one note that our audit was submitted and approved, so we met our deadline. I want to thank the full commission for granting the executive committee the ability to move forward and, after review from the full commission, allow the executive committee to approve and submit that, and that was done with no issues. So thank you for all of those on that quick pull-up meeting that we had after we met at the airport. We did meet here as an executive committee and got that done on behalf of the board. The next item is the Audit and Finance and Facilities Committee. A statement was included in the packet. If all committee members had an opportunity to review the statement. Any general questions before we open it up? I don't see Mr. Holland here, but I know Mr. Van Dornick's with us. All right, Mr. Van Dornick, do you want to give us a presentation on that? And I would ask, if you wouldn't mind, go to the podium. Can you take your technology with you? Do you need your technology? Thank you, Mr. Van Dornick.
You have the finance report in your package, pages 7 through 22. I won't go through all of it, but I'll hit a couple of the points that I see as being most pertinent for our conversation today. Kind of go into the bottom line first. For the 6 months ended December 31st, 2022, we did experience an operating surplus of $8,457. That is against a projected budget of break even. So we're able to slightly outpace what we actually budgeted. A lot of that budget, the assumptions were based on growth investments in staff, in facility. And so we're excited to see that our projections are holding strong. There are about 3 items to note. Our revenue, if you look at the top of page 13, is not tracking to where you would think it would be at December 31st at about 50%. And especially amongst federal and state funding, we're actually below 40%. Kind of 2 reasons for that. The first is that in the first 6 months of the year, we have a large percentage of our holiday time. And we do have a number of sick and vacation time that's more so in the first 6 months of the year than in the second 6 months of the year. Therefore, the amount of leave time we have is greater, which means the amount of productive time is less. So we're expecting to be less than 50% because of that issue, that seasonality. The second issue is that we have 2 staff vacancies in our TPO program. One as of July 1st, so the entire year, and then the second at September 15th. Those positions are not filled at this point. What is currently under recruitment, and we expect to have that filled soon. The second position is being re-envisioned as to what specifically we need in this time, rather than just replacing who we had and the types of skills that person had. We're actually looking at, how do we need to invest into this particular employee slot. What happens though is when you miss those hours, in 6 months, you're looking at about 1,000 hours for the total vacancy and 750 hours for the other vacancy, which is, the bread and butter of how we actually build our programs, especially out of the other TPO. So those 2 items, the seasonality of the paid time off with holidays and the 2 vacant positions, are why our revenues are not tracking up to where our original projections were. Now, in response to that, we have been able to monitor expenses, and you see that our expenses are also tracking at less than 40%. And that's due to the conscious effort to, slow down on certain discretionary items. And with the 2 positions empty, obviously there's no related employee costs. So between those 2 items, or those 3 items, we're still able to maintain our budget. And we expect to do so going forward. We are in the middle of doing a new projection for fiscal '23 to recognize those changes that we have, mid-year, and are actually starting on our fiscal '24 budget as well, which should be presented to the Finance Committee in their April meeting. Are there any questions? Anything that you saw in the report that comes to mind? Anything that you're curious about?
Anything from committee members? Mr. Waddell.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. On page 16, paid time off, vacation and sick is 83.5% of the budget, and I'm looking over on page 3 of 5 under profit and loss, 74.1%. Am I on the wrong page, or I'm confused on 83.5 versus 74.1?
The 83% is for sick time only. The 74% in the statement is actually the combination of both vacation leave and sick time.
Thank you.
Right, and that's percent of what was budgeted for that line item.
But thank you. This is one question. I might be skipping ahead. Regional strategic planning moved to scenario planning for 27,855. Why was that move made? Or am I getting ahead of your presentation?
No, that's an excellent question. What we did there is when we did the original budget, we had planned activities that would essentially maximize our use of the budgeted TPO funds. But with those 2 empty positions, we were able to absorb that work into other existing positions. And so to kind of help with the budget, the hours that were spent in the regional plan actually do qualify to fit into the scenario planning element of the TPO plan of the UPWP. And so we made the decision to be able to move that money from an unfunded project line of business into a funded one.
Thank you. Sure. So on page 10D, funding not anticipated in the original budget. It's a procedural type question. Do you identify a need and then search for grant funding? Does my question make any sense?
Yeah, the items that I mentioned that were revenue that was not anticipated were actually special projects. They weren't actually technically grants. In our data group, in our line of business, you had a presentation, I believe, a couple months ago from Dr. Kali.
Oh, Kari, yeah.
Thank you. We're growing and developing that program. When we anticipated the budget, we did not have many revenues specifically identified, but our strategy was to actually be able to earn service fees by contract, by project, and we did have a couple of those opportunities come to fruition where we were able to do a special analysis for other entities.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mr. Waddell. Y'all may recall the presentation, I believe we were down at the airport when that presentation went in. So we're not counting those in the budget yet, but typically so the service fees, we all know about those. There was a great presentation on that, and we've gotten some others. What was the other service fee we got? Oh, Virginia Chiefs of Police, as an example, we took some stuff. But when the funding comes in for that, Mr. Waddell, it's already attached to an SP special project. So, and I think that's probably the best way to put it for layman's terms. So when the money comes in, that special project, we're not searching for it. We sought the money out for the special project that was designated prior to the funding. Should the funding not come in, then we don't execute the SP.
We proactively search for.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Outside of service fees.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Anything further for the question? Final question, Mr. Wendell, yes?
My question quota.
Yeah.
Skipping down, give me 2 seconds because I've got some notes. 6425 travel agency, 964.3% travel agency fees.
That was for your Bahama trip, the Hawaii trip.
I was hoping to fly under the radar. And another one, 4801, interest income of 630% over projected. And one of those, give me 2 seconds. I did some homework last night and lost my page. Oh, I'm sorry, it's on page 19, 4801, interest income, under administration, $4,002, but your percent utilized is 630%. Interest income, what's the secret?
Interest income, we under budgeted. When we prepared the budget in last year. And we had a couple of items come through, including an annual rebate on one of our credit card accounts that just unnaturally inflated that number for the first half of the year.
And while the interest income is not a big line item, you'll often see sometimes smaller numbers have bigger percentages. And so that's where that came from. And as a general rule, we probably want to stay rather conservative on projection of interest income. If you notice, the number's not huge, but that's where you get some of those fluctuations.
I like some
Did you have, so there were 2 questions, I think, in that. You had something about travel? Is that answered?
Yes. travel 6425, the 6,000 series of accounts are actually direct expenses, items that go directly to a particular grant. We had a lower amount, as you see in the budget. So we were able, based on what we actually experienced in our travel and the purposes of that travel, to actually assign it directly to the grant, more than what we had expected. You would actually see on the next page, near the bottom, accounts 7420 and 7425 are sitting at 22% and 17%. So that's kind of a related offset.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Van Dornick. I appreciate that. It was very comprehensive. Mr. Waddell?
Just one quick comment.
Yes, sir.
I like the format, the new format from a year ago. It makes it easier and productive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. We appreciate that. Hearing no further questions, and Mr. Holland's not with us. So this was brought to us, the committee sends a recommendation with presentation of the report or recommendation out of the committee to approve. Is there a motion to approve the financial report?
So moved.
Ms. O'Bannon?
Second.
And second by Dr. Newbill. Is there any discussion? We do a voice vote. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Kumar, let the record reflect a unanimous vote. Next item, item number B2, FY 2023 budget update. Anything further on that?
No, I think Mr. Van Dornick covered that.
Yeah, we did it kind of together, but anything from committee members? I mean, you kind of get the financial report, which is part and parcel. Okay, very well, we'll move forward. Next item on the agenda, B.C. is public outreach and engagement. Mr. Davies not with us. Our executive director, Ms. Schickel, will handle that. And we'll start with the first look, event recap, and anything else at her discretion. Thank you, Ms. Schickel.
Thank you. Public outreach committee members, thank you very much for hosting the first look event that we had in January. I felt like it was, well, it wasn't the first time that many of you came to our space. It was nice to be able to have that event and recognize those that made the space possible. So thank you for thinking to host that event, and also thanks to those of you that were able to be here in attendance. The committee has set in motion a number of things that staff have been working on. So while we haven't set a new committee meeting date, we've been kind of hard at work on the inside. So a couple of updates I wanted to share with you. The newsletter dropped last Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, the 31st. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, please search through your email or shoot me an email and I will make sure that the newsletter comes to you. But it is scheduled to come out quarterly. We're hoping in the upcoming fiscal year, we're going to be able to move that to be a monthly newsletter. So stay tuned on that. We've found that it's actually been hard to condense the content for a quarterly newsletter. We're also in the habit of publishing, I think, 2 blog posts a month. So if you're interested in seeing what's going on or having a deep dive, or for those of you who push content out to your constituents through district newsletters or district meetings, we'd be happy to share that in a different format if you want to drop that into your constituent newsletter. So just keep us posted on that for projects that might be happening in your neck of the woods. Mr. Davis and I are hoping to be able to make visits to each of the 9 jurisdictions to give a presentation about PlanRVA over the next couple of months. So we'll be working on scheduling that, probably through executive committee members and local government administrators. So just know that we'll be looking for opportunities on your local meeting agendas to come and pay you a visit. And I also just wanted to make the offer that Rashonda Lanier-Jackson on our team and Gilbert Gogol will be reaching out to points of contact in your offices. So for the localities who have staff support to local board of supervisor members, or for the council liaisons, we'll be reaching out to you or to your team members rather to understand whether you have any district meetings scheduled. We'll be kicking off some of our public outreach activities. We're printing new emergency preparedness guides. We have, all the things that you've seen before, the document bags, the emergency thermometers and those kinds of things, but we try to get those in the hands of members of the public. So if you're hosting a district meeting and you'd be interested in us having some of our collateral material there. We've got some new water bottles for the Don't Trash Central Virginia campaign that we manage with the region's anti-litter program managers and some other things like that. So we'd love to be able to either spotlight something that's happening at the commission that you'd like to have your constituents know about, or just to be able to provide material. So I know, Mr. Thornton, you've had us come to some of your district meetings, even virtually before, and that's been a really great opportunity. So if you're hosting anything like that and you think it would be valuable, we would love to do that, and our team members will be reaching out to your folks.
All right, thank you very much. Do you want to go ahead and move right into the executive director's report?
Sure, we have included the intergovernmental and environmental reviews. Just to kind of ground that, I probably say this every couple months, but I think it's helpful. Why is this in your packet? It's because one of the responsibilities that the code sets out for planning district commissions is that we are the clearinghouse, if you will, for intergovernmental and environmental reviews, that the state is most of the time, it's a state agency who's issuing perhaps a permit, or you can see the different types of activities there. Sarah Stewart and our team manages this process, and so she's got that cover page there on page 23 that describes what an intergovernmental or an environmental review is, and then the chart on pages 24 and 25 document the latest and greatest. This is a reporting element that we have to submit to the state every year, so it's part of our annual report, and we provide it to you as a point of information. It's not an action item. Typically what it means for us to do an intergovernmental or environmental review is it comes to our office, we circulate it to the local governments that are considered to be affected. So that could be that the permit issuance is scheduled for that locality and or it's an adjacent community. And so we circulate that to staff and invite them to, or give them the instructions really to be able to submit input. So we're not necessarily weighing in on these things. Most of the time we actually are not, but we're the clearinghouse, as I said, for point of information to be able to provide that opportunity to your local government staff. So it's an administrative process that we've been responsible for now for many, many years. So, and then all of the detail on each of those things are summarized on the pages that follow.
Question?
Yeah.
So question, not for the 9 jurisdictions within the PlanRVA region, but for the reviews outside of the PlanRVA, how do you determine the criteria for what you will go ahead and bring into your purview, bring into your review?
So sometimes it might be based on watershed. There might be things like that. Typically that would be what would impact that. Occasionally there might be something from a transportation network, but that's very unlikely, quite honestly. It's usually because of something that's upstream from us that we would want to be aware of from a watershed perspective.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Anything further?
No, I wanted to, if it was okay with you, Mr. Chair, just sort of yield my time for an executive director report to be able to introduce that.
So with that, we'll go to our special program. Ms. Schiff will introduce Mr. Parsons.
Thank you. At the beginning of this fiscal year, Mr. Davis challenged me to think about why I wanted to bring special programs to you and why I would want to schedule that. I think there's a lot of recognition in the region that this is a powerful convening of leaders from around the region, and we often get requests from outside groups to come and present. And we have occasionally certainly entertained that when we thought that it was a valuable use of your time and theirs to come. But we also try to set aside some balance in our meetings to be able to focus on the work that's happening here in the agency. So in December, when we hosted the meeting at the airport, I think we were trying to share with you a little bit about our growing competency and capability around data, research, and analysis. Serene Hadakari made that presentation, and so we wanted to follow that presentation with Mr. Parsons today to talk with you about what I'll say is probably one of the most exciting things that's happening with PlanRVA right now in our scenario planning effort. I don't think he'll tell you this, so I will. He and Sulab Ariel just came back from a conference in Phoenix, Arizona last week, where they were presenting on the national stage. This region is leading the country in what we're doing with scenario planning, and I wanted to be able to say that because I know he won't. We're not just among middle markets and sort of what I would call mid-sized NPOs and mid-sized regions, but even among some of the largest and most sophisticated planning organizations across the country. So kudos to Chet and Sue Webb for how they've designed this effort. And we wanted to be able to peel back a little bit of the curtain today to be able to share with you what's going on and what's ahead and how we're thinking about structuring this process. Chet, I hope that was a comfortable enough introduction for you.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here to talk with you this morning about one of the projects that we're working on the that originated on the transportation side, but it's, as hopefully you'll see in the presentation, it's bigger than just transportation. So as Martha mentioned, this is a few steps into developing this project. We've been talking about it for a number of years, and actually this morning I feel a little bad because you're getting the preview of this project before the TPO does. The past few months at the TPO have been packed agendas, and we haven't had the time to actually put it on. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this test drive with you. Scenario planning, I mentioned it's been a long road. We first started talking about this and getting this idea in our heads back in 2014. This region, and this was before my time, hosted a peer exchange where Federal Highways brought in the best and brightest from around the country into our region to talk about this concept of scenario planning. From that point, we participated in other peer exchanges across the country. We've become a member of this consortium of scenario planning, which Martha mentioned, the conference that Sue Love and I attended last week to talk about what we're doing. And it's a group of practitioners, best and brightest from educational institutions across the country, talking about the new ways to think about how to better plan for the needs that we're all going to experience in the future. And then the last time we developed our long-range transportation plan, PlanRVA 2045, we had intended to have scenario planning be a integral part of that plan. As we all experienced, COVID changed those plans, and it took away some of the tools that we were hoping for enabled in terms of engaging the public and doing workshops and making sure that this was something that there was a broad-based buy-in for. So we used that time to think more academically about how we would approach it once we had the opportunity. And now that the plan is adopted, we are now doing a standalone scenario planning project, and it's very exciting. And we've titled it Pathways to the Future. So, as you all know, I mean, you're the boots on the ground here. Planning for the future, looking at visionary steps for what we need in our region is more than just transportation. It's more than just economic development. It's all of these things that you see in this pie chart, and probably more, that connect and influence each other. And I think we all have an understanding that yes, that is the case. But how do we actually make those connections? How do we find data and inflection points that actually show that a transportation decision may influence how a new housing development comes out of the ground, and what are the connections between those two things? So that's kind of the impetus to think about this concept called scenario planning. And I'm just going to go through at a high level, kind of where we are and where we want to go. So long-range planning, whether it's developing a comprehensive plan at a locality level, whether it's doing a long-range transportation plan at the MPO, it's a vision process, right? The typical steps are you develop a vision statement, you come up with goals and objectives, and then you find out what the steps are to get there. And it's usually long range, 10, 15, 20 years out in the future. That's what we specialize in as a region. So that's kind of the approach that we have always taken. You come up with that vision statement to start, right? Long-range planning benefits from looking at a range of visions through scenario planning. So the concept is to not just think about one future vision. We are going to be at this point in 20 years. We could be at 5 different points. And how do we plan for that? And those futures, those varying future conditions, are influenced by a lot of different community factors like land use and housing, economics, climate change and resiliency, and technology more so than ever. Traditionally, doing a long-range plan, we'll say a comprehensive plan at the local level, the first part is existing conditions. What's happened in the past? What do we know in terms of what's on the ground today? And that's usually the foundation to become the basis for then looking at models and projections and estimates for what we're going to need in the future. This concept of scenario planning takes into account that future conditions may change, and to be aware of that uncertainty in the future, thinking about all these different disruptors that might alter those future trends. So thinking about things like technology advances, community values, those change on the regular, economic changes, and then resiliency to climate and other impacts. The primary purpose is to be prepared. This analogy is something that really struck the attendees at the conference we attended. It's like looking at what we develop as a region as a defensive playbook. We don't know what the offense is going to throw at us, right? So we want to put together the most comprehensive package of tools and ideas that we can refer back to. We can go to in an audible situation to best prepare for and implement the steps needed to plan for those future changes. And traditionally, if you look at the dartboard example here, we typically want to look at one future possibility. So you throw the dart, you think that, okay, 20 years from now, where that dart lands, it could be a fairly mobile location on the board. But what we want to do with this process is think about, what if we threw 10 darts or 20 darts? What can we do in terms of preparation to best put ourselves in a position to be successful, no matter where that dart lands on the board?
Can
That
I ask a question?
that may be all the metaphors, but yes, ma'am.
With that one, so are you working on, one of the things you do with the budget is you do one, if the economy's good, if the economy's not as good, or if there's a total bust. You know? Are you saying that you're gonna have 3 different visions that come out of this?
Yes, and I will get into that.
Okay, so that's what that is saying, okay.
So this is kind of a general flow chart of how this process is going to develop. Starting from the left, we understand what the conditions are today, right? We know what the region is based on census data and local information and development trends and all those other things. We are going to look at possible different forces of future change, what we've called these disruptors. And then using that information, we're going to develop multiple scenarios for the future. So right now our horizon year is 2050. So that'll feed into the next long-range transportation plan, as well as, we hope, lots of other efforts. And then looking at each of those future conditions and scenarios, we're going to develop a set of models that look at many different data sets, like transportation, like economic development, like land use, like nutrient loading on the environmental side, building emissions, all those different things that come into play that tell us what impacts of these decisions might do. And then the outcome, we are hopeful, is that this is going to develop a tool that is not only useful for our staff and our agency, but something that'll be useful for your staff to go back at the local level to implement and test possible futures. We think it'll be a useful tool for our housing partners, our environmental partners around the region, and lots of other groups that we actually have plugged into this process. So again, we're looking at these uncertainties in the future, right? So the best way to do that in terms of developing this process is to look at those future conditions that are both highly uncertain and highly impactful. It would be, I'll call it a waste of time to look at 2050 conditions that are all, a step from each other. We want to look at possible big changes that might change the impacts of projects we're thinking about. So if you look at the table in the bottom right, that's just going from low to high. We want to look at those conditions in box 4. Most uncertainty and most impact. Some of those forces of change, as we've started talking with our advisory committee, are on the graphic to the left, things like an aging population, economic growth, local flooding, just going around the dial, agricultural technology, mobility on demand, housing preferences, and there's lots of others. And these are just an illustration of some of the things that we've started thinking about. So we do have an advisory committee that is established. We've had a kickoff meeting, and we're preparing for our next one in early March. One of the first activities we did with the advisory committee was looking at what they think, as subject matter experts, what they think those future disruptors might be. And we were able to categorize them into these 4 major categories: community, technology, economy, and resiliency. And it's probably too hard to read, but it's a laundry list of all the different things that these people thought could influence decisions and project success in the future. And it goes, the idea here is this was a first stab at coming up with the entire list. We're going to now be narrowing down this list to think about what are the things we can actually assess using data. So some of the things are more qualitative, and we're going to acknowledge that as part of the process, but we really want to drive down to what are the data-driven decisions that we can help influence and provide resources for. In the end, I hope that it's something as simple as a slider scenario, right? If you can imagine going to a project website or a local community meeting, Mrs. O'Bannon's community group, and thinking about having a discussion. Well, okay, if the population does increase, we slide that slider up. If the economy stays stagnant, we keep it right in the middle. If we do see lots of growth and development in greenfields, out in areas where there isn't growth and development, slide that up. And the climate is stable, slide that down. What are the impacts? How do all of these different project ideas rate? And then you do 5 or 6 different options there to look at future conditions that might play, and see which projects stand up the best to all of those future conditions. So again, the defensive playbook. We want to come up with projects that stand the test of time and hold up to any future condition that we might throw at it. Not to go too far into the weeds, but some of the things we're looking at in terms of possible growth scenarios, population and employment is going to be a big driver in any of those future conditions. Land use changes, we are working directly with the planning departments in every jurisdiction to think about what those might be. Infrastructure changes, and really this is about sustainability of the existing system. If there is more extreme flooding in the future, what are the parts of the network that are going to be impacted most? Where are you going to see localized flooding more often in the future? Those kinds of impacts. And then technological advancement. We've been talking about autonomous vehicles for a few years now. If that does come into place and is more widely adopted, what does that mean for how the region develops? Once we have these future scenarios in place, we'll come up with, as I said, data-driven metrics to assess the impacts of those on the future conditions of the entire region. And we can see 3 different levels of adoption. And I think this body, first of all, is in level 1, education and awareness. We want to provide easily understandable tools to talk about this complex issue so that you all can go back to your constituents and be able to provide some resources and some understanding when people come to you with questions. 2 is strategic direction. This is more at the staff level. What kind of data and inputs can we provide as you all develop transportation plans, comprehensive plans, economic development strategies, environmental, like hazard mitigation plans? Those are all going to keep going, but we want to be able to provide some more resources to include better decision-making in that process. And then finally, action implementation. We hope that this could help shape policy decisions. We think that it will stand up based on the amount of research and data development that's going into it. So we think that this will be a good tool to provide another arrow in your quiver as you think about policy needs for the future and advocating for projects that stand the test of time. So to start to wind up, we're looking at 3 different levels of engagement for this process. The first of all is the general public. We're setting up a series of interactive online surveys, and we've had success with that during COVID and after. We're planning in-person intercepts at different events around the community over the next 12 to 16 months. We have a stakeholder committee, and I'll look at the makeup of that in a second. And then we'd like to provide regular briefings here at the TPO and at the CBTA, because I think all three agencies are important to stay in the loop. 2 different phases of engagement. The first is kind of happening right now, and the goal is to create a public understanding of what this is and why it's useful. And then the outcome is to get feedback and inform the framework for defining and telling the story about what those future narratives are. And then the second phase is towards the end. Once we have some outcomes to share, present those, get feedback, and adjust as needed to make sure that we end up the project with a set of tools that is helpful. Our advisory committee is broad. This is something that I haven't been involved with before. We kind of, as Martha mentioned in the beginning, this is something that nobody else in the country is really doing, to look at something this comprehensive. So we wanted to involve as many different disciplines and specialties as possible. So we have transportation folks, obviously, but we have land use and community development experts, environment, emergency management. We have Partnership for Housing Affordability is on our advisory committee. We have energy, the energy companies are involved, economic development experts, and then the Department of Health is also on the committee. And we're excited. Everybody has, at least from the first meeting of the advisory committee, everybody is on board and has been participating fully. So we're excited about where this is going to go.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Question. I look in that list and I think there's one missing, but maybe I'm wrong, but who's going to represent technology and future technologies on that?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is everybody. Because of the widespread use of technology for all these different types of uses. The transportation professionals, of course, are going to be involved there. We're using a consultant team as well that is deeply versed in the latest technology and opportunities that are popping up around the country and even around the world, probably. An international firm that's been helping us with that. So,
because we're getting hit with a company wanting to use drones for delivering products.
yes,
And so there's no regulation on that right now.
that's right. I actually was talking with the Department of Aviation yesterday about that exact project. So I think we have everything covered, but that's a great point, Mr. Carroll. We'll make sure that is.
And I think too, one of the things as it relates to technology is some of the folks, Mr. Kell brings up a good point, and this is something that I think we need to talk about, is that all the folks on there need to talk about the technology as it relates to their individual sectors, right? So, sometimes when you bring in a technology person, it's kind of a siloed approach, but the technology that health is using is going to be different than technology that transportation is using in their own sectors. So I think it would be important to make sure that those folks are kind of spun up on, hey, that's part of your duties as you sit on the advisory committee to realize that we need updates on what's changing inside each one of those industries as it relates to technology.
I mean, Mr. Chair, as an example for housing, broadband, what's the state of broadband within the region, what, you know, and how is that gonna be expanded? You know, whether it be even 5G network as an example, or, you know, my partner here ends up seeing towers up and down Route 1 the other day that are actually, looks like they're 5G network towers put up by Dominion to manage the smart meters.
Actually not, they
You're not?
were their cell phone towers.
Their cell phone
Dominion
towers.
did deny they were
Okay, so
their
that-
cell phone towers.
be prepared for that showing up in your jurisdictions where they're just popping up these 5G things, and
And
these
they
are on
look horrible.
these are on a telephone pole.
22 of them, got a picture if you want to see.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got
so
it.
it's,
In one neighborhood.
yep, and so those are the type of things that I think whoever's sitting on there needs to, like you said, they need to have their thumb on the pulse of what's going on so that if we can have the best information possible.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Davis, I'm wrapping up just now, but
Yeah, sure.
I think the point you made is a great one, and I will say that having all these different subject matter experts around the table in that first meeting, you could see the light bulbs going off, because they're not talking, we're not all talking to each other on a regular basis, so having everyone providing that kind of brain dump has been, I think it's gonna be really great. So the next steps, we're at the red line right now. We're expecting to wrap this up about this time next year. And it's gonna involve lots of different opportunities for feedback and updates to you all. I'd be happy to bring you in closer if you wanted to dive into the weeds as we look at data sets and models and everything else. But we're excited about the project, and I think that's it. Thank you for your time.
Sure. I've got a couple of questions. Yes, sir, Doctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I may have missed it, I'm new. So, tell me again what the mission is. Can you explain to me what the mission of this project is?
I think the mission is to better inform decisions at its root. Right now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we go on a model that looks at one possible condition. The idea is that maybe everybody can agree that that's where we want to go, but that's not always going to be the case. And I think we see as time goes on, there's uncertainty in everything. So we want to be able to better prepare for that uncertainty by considering what those possible future options could be. The outcome is a good real world example. On the transportation side, the outcome could be we're looking at a new, we'll say a new interchange in Charles City County. One of the things that this process could do would be to consider possible outcomes that say that project might not stand up if scenario B, C, and D actually come to fruition. But if you look at that same interchange, another exit up, it may not, it may be successful in all conditions. So it's a project-based assessment of what will stand up and what won't.
But looking it through the lens of transportation, am I accurate about that?
That's one way, yes, but the hope is here, and that's why we assembled this diverse group of people, is a housing decision could be assessed the same way.
Right. So I was looking, if we go back to a previous slide, was that just how the committee is set up. What I was struck by was that, I mean, in the end, I would assume that we're looking for quality of life, we're looking for those kind of things. I mean, that is ultimately,
Right.
I'm hoping is what the goal is. So what I was struck by, I mean, I can't help it, I'm looking through a lens, my doctorate's in clinical psychology. So I'm thinking about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So those basic needs have to be in place so that we can all move towards self-actualization. So I'm noticing some of the things there that are on that list, like housing, like economic development, and community health, that they aren't as broadly, that they're not, we don't have, those numbers are very small on the way that has been diversified on just that committee. So that, it strikes me that to making sure that we're paying attention to those bases, the foundation of the community, and then growing from there. So I just want to kind of, that's what struck me when I was going through this.
Yes, sir, I appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Dr. Miller. I think Mr. Thornton, or I saw somebody else on this. Mr. Thornton, yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask Mr. Parson, do we have opportunity to view this pathway to the future on our own? Your presentation?
Oh, you mean come to you? Yes, sir.
No, I mean.
No, it's a copy
You know,
of.
not just come to me also, but can I peruse it on?
We'll make the presentation.
Available.
We'll get that available, sure.
We always post all of the presentations from the meetings.
But we can make sure that it's
Yeah.
hand delivered in whatever format you want, Mr. Thornton, so, yeah, absolutely. Mr. Waddell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned charrettes. When will
Yes.
these charrettes be held and where?
That's a great question. We're working on that right now. Again, it's gonna be those two phases, so kind of a third in and 2/3 in. We're working out the locations for those and what that's actually gonna look like now.
Okay, and you've got the SBAC meetings. Are they public and can anybody drop in?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they'll be held here. They're public meetings, just like everything else that we sponsor, so,
Okay, that would be posted on our PlanRVA website.
yes.
Thank you.
Anything further? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, first of all, I want to congratulate you on this really good work. I'm familiar with industry doing a lot of work in using data to come up with different scenarios, and the better the data, the more rapidly they can respond, and that can, reduce costs and supply chain yet. I mean, this is a fairly common thing to do outside of planning, and I'm really glad to see us looking at using data and scenarios, and it's great. The one thing I would encourage is you're going through that sort of awareness education to being able to actually use these kind of things for planning, is to bring this group and help us bring our constituents along on what data is driving what sort of conclusions in the model and why. If you think about something like climate change, there's gonna be some reaction people have to, well, the model says we need to do this or not invest here or whatever, and it will help as we move forward if people understand kind of why the data says what it said. This data is being gathered to do this. The other thing that I typically see in industry is as you start making projections with your data, then you track how well is it going. So our model considered these scenarios. It's now been 2 years. Here's where we are, and you use that as an opportunity to educate people that this process is taking us down the path.
Yes.
So really good work. I just would encourage, it's going to be a process to bring people along so that as we start making decisions and trying to actually use this for direction setting, people are really bought in.
Yes, ma'am.
The only,
And then Ms.
following
Black.
up with that, when we had our transportation planning in the past, it would aim us in certain directions, and I know often we'd say, why did you come up with that? And the one I just recall was that, not that I have anything against bicyclists, but that more than like 70% of the people who responded, who appeared in the presentations, were bicyclists. And so everything, they really piled on and got everybody in their group to respond. Any group could do that. And it seemed like those are the only people that are interested in this. So by showing statistical evidence like that, is that what you're talking about doing too with this? Is that 70% of the people that responded were cyclists, and they said, instead of doing this road work, we should do this? I mean, I've had that happen in my own district.
Yes, that's a great question, and that's not really part of this process. We want to elicit customer feedback on what we're doing, but it's not going to be the primary driver of where the direction of this goes, for the exact reason you're mentioning. The public
Groups can do that. They can
Yes.
influence they get all their friends and guide them to go take that survey and be sure you put in here some. Just as for instance, I did have that happen along a very narrow road. They didn't want a sidewalk, they wanted a 10-foot path for bicyclists. I said, where'd this come from? But we ended up doing a walking path, because when I had the meetings, it became very easily figured out that all these bicyclists show up. That's all I'm saying, is and it has happened with this group too, in the setting. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. 2 questions, Mr. Chairman. One was about innovation and technology, and one was about farming and rural properties. I wanted to follow up on the comments Mr. Carroll said, because on your slide with the number of folks that were represented by the different disciplines, I really feel it needs to be some type of focus on innovation or technology or even new forward thinking or even, not necessarily futurist, but there's a lot of folks who are almost in the area of IT, of forward thinking, of disrupting entrepreneurs that look at traditional topics the way that we as planners may look at things and then look at it a lot differently. So I think you had about 16 or so people on that list, if I added
Six
up.
on more transportation, you probably
Yeah,
swap one out.
and about 16 or so, and if there's no, if you have room for 17 or 18, I'd suggest a technologist or an IT company or somebody who's forward-looking, future-thinking in that realm. And I could talk to you more offline about some of that. And I hate to say it, there's serial entrepreneurs out there who found new companies every 2 or 3 years that might fit that mold to kind of give you some vigor in there. The second comment was about rural lands or land use and farming. Every day at work, we connect solar farms to the electric transmission grid, and even wind farm projects too, you may have heard about, read about for renewables. Every day there's pressure on farmers in our rural counties in the PlanRVA region on what goes on in their land in the future. And when you look at the impact of solar farms, one of the things that industry has done as a new technology or innovative way to look at solar panels is like, well, if there's pressure for us not to have solar farms in certain areas because folks are concerned that you're not going to be able to plant corn or beans there anymore, is they're getting into a business called indoor vertical farming. And back on your slide, a few slides back, you had the 4 driving forces of change, disruptors, one of which was technology. I'd highly suggest to consider research in indoor vertical farming, because what they're doing is a lot of the land is being displaced where you're putting solar panels on, you have erosion and sun control issues on the rural areas. They're looking at growing food and vegetables and fruits inside warehouses in urban environments, and you don't even know it's there, and they're making up for that. So that is, and from a land use perspective, it's really important to understand how the community grows. So something to research in detail.
So the farmland is getting
Thanks.
covered by
So
solar panels, so the farmers are using solar panels on the top of their facilities for vertical farming.
Well, it's warehouses. The warehouses in the city are making up for the food loss. So
No,
a warehouse in the cities or urban areas throughout the country are making up for that food loss in the rural areas by putting food in a multi-story warehouse in the city next to a mixed use, a brand new, beautiful mixed use development. There may be some in Manchester. So, just a thought.
Yes, sir.
We're getting the largest indoor vertical farming facility in the country.
There you go.
Medical
So,
technology.
yeah,
There's
so,
an example.
so I think, and thank you all for those comments. I think the comments around the table as you went around, you recognize
But you're right.
what hopefully this group is designed,
Weird.
ladies and gentlemen, what it's designed to do. First and foremost, it's not designed to add an extra layer of government or bureaucracy or analytics that doesn't go anywhere. It should be action-based. And to Ms. O'Bannon's point, sometimes we do have, groups that come in and say, this is what we want. And sometimes those who show up can tend to influence. But as we've dealt with things, let's go back to the boring and mundane things that sometimes we get kicked around with, like the 6-year plan or smart scale or something. We think we've got it all figured out, and the rules that we were playing by, we did have it all figured out. Then the rules changed just a couple of blocks over here in Richmond. We're like, well, wait a minute, what just happened to our project? Or how did a bike path trump a road project that we really thought was gonna move forward? And so the idea is that as we go forward, this will help us look at competitiveness, how things fit, and how we can continue to, I hate to use these old terms, but our deliverables mean something. We're in the deliverable business for our constituents, our localities. We have to get these things done. And so while nobody's opposed to bike paths or sidewalks necessarily as a foundational principle, it becomes tough when something like that outweighs a traffic need that's been identified for years. Something changes, and hopefully a group like this without getting overly bureaucratic, but bringing in other folks, say, hey, if you thought about this, this may allow you to be a little bit more competitive, or maybe we don't go down this path right now because of somebody brings in one of these serial entrepreneurs and says, some things are changing on the horizon. Stop it here and redirect so you don't find yourself going headlong into a storm that before we wouldn't have seen. So I think those are, all of the points that were brought up here go directly back to the creation of the SPAC. So thank you all for that. I think that the comments just reinforced exactly what this group's doing. Chet, I think you did a phenomenal job, not only on the presentation, but how you're bringing those things together. And I guess the last comment I would make before I turn it over to Ms. Schickel is that this isn't static. It can change. As we see needs, we can bring folks onto the committee and say, wow, this is an emerging thought process. We probably need to have somebody from that industry or that sector, or somebody who is recognizing those types of things. And then to that end, from time to time, we need to have somebody, talk about the regulatory and legislative impacts in each one of those sectors, because that's changing quite a bit as well. So they'll be able to bring that to us. So should we get comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think this has already been touched upon, but I'm really viewing that scenario planning isn't a project for us, it's a way that we operate, and it's that iterative process of kind of consistently, constantly evaluating where things are headed and how those factors or those disruptions, affect the decision-making process. And so as we develop our work program for next year, I just wanted to be able to say, as part of this presentation that Chet's made, that's largely informing how we're thinking about structuring that. So, much differently than in the past, where we say, well, we're gonna administer these 17 grants and we're going to fulfill the deliverables of these grants because the state agency said that this was important. We really want this scenario planning process to become that kind of like anchor. And so as questions come up about, well, what is the broadband capacity for the region? Or, what is going on? We want to be able to, and Chet and I have been literally working on this for years now that we've been working together. We want to be able to transform the way that this agency operates and the way that it delivers its programs to be responsive to those questions, and to be able to make this be a place where you feel like your staff members can be a part of, but also be the beneficiary of this data and this evaluation and kind of analysis. So I don't know that we're going to get it perfect in this upcoming year's work program, but that's really kind of where we're headed, to be able to make sure that this organization, from the strategic planning process that we undertook several years ago to today and beyond, really is becoming that resource for you. I think we all can appreciate this organization isn't trying to get out in front of your localities, but we are in a way, not from a decision-making perspective, but in a way of being able to have those resources at the ready when you all need them.
Yeah, when the localities need them.
So, so I just kind of wanted to plant that seed, I think in that way, as we start to formulate how we're gonna organize and pursue our work next year.
Thank you, Mr. Waddell.
Mr. Chairman and Ms. Schickel, your comments caused me to think that this is a leap forward, very comprehensive. Can we put a chapter, can I suggest we put a chapter in the outreach document about scenario planning? Because I think that is part and parcel to what we, as you pointed out, are doing, the way we operate. That needs to be in the outreach document. It's valuable services ongoing.
Yeah, yes, short answer. And I think we'll be talking with the committee, your committee, about how we use this material, our outreach material for the localities, and then our outreach material for the broader public to better convey that. So, and I think you'll be part of that.
And link that to available resources for the localities. So, yeah, thank you for that. Mr. Parsons.
Just one last point, and I don't want to abuse my ability to stand here and talk, but I think that this says a lot, and to Mr. Bacca's comments, we have a staff that I would be remiss not to recognize right now. I mean, everybody who's working on this project is an expert in their field, and that's where we're headed as an agency. We want to provide those resources internally to this body as well as the TPO and CBTA, so that we don't have to go out and find, third-party experts. We have them all here. That's part, Mr. Van Dornick mentioned the gaps that we have right now in filling out our staff. We're trying to find those people that are gonna buy into this vision and help the agency move forward. So I'm excited about this, and as Martha mentioned, this is something that we've been working on for years, so we wanna see it continue to grow.
Yeah, no, you've assembled a good team. We appreciate your leadership and your administration of this, so it does mean a lot. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That means a lot, Chet. Yeah, I think you're right. Give credit where credit's due. Appreciate you recognizing the team. Okay, no further questions. Are there any general comments by commission members? Anything at all? Okay, the time is 10:24.